Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 2, Episode 10. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In today's episode, we're speaking with one of the top retail analysts in the business, Brendan Witcher from Forrester. A wide-ranging conversation, never shy about sharing his thoughts and insights around retail technology and retailers. We talk culture and how change does and does not happen with retailers.
Yeah, well, as I think we've dipped into a number of times, culture is the thing that gets in the way of a lot of innovation. And, you know, in my experience, it's an incredibly hard thing to change unless you're really forced to. And I think COVID certainly has jump-started a lot of innovation, basically because in many cases, retailers didn't have any choice to engage in multiple change. But that longer-term change to respond to digital disruption, changing consumer preferences, and all that kind of stuff, it certainly looks, if history's any indication, that it's pretty hard for most retailers to change as profoundly and as quickly as they need to.
Well, and as we've often hit upon as almost a theme running like a highway up the center of our discussions, is this idea of why it takes a crisis to make change happen, and how do you institutionalize change without having, you know, COVID element scale crises that you know, how do you make that move happen, right? And you know, it'll be interesting to get Brendan's perspective because he's been looking at this from all kinds of different angles, as well as you writing in the book about it many times, right?
Yeah, it's certainly been an area of interest for me for a long time. Unfortunately, it's not so easy to give simple, easy, implementable advice.
Right. All right. Just before we bring Brendan on, you've got the revised and expanded second edition of your book, Remarkable Retail, coming out very soon. You're doing a couple of special events to celebrate. Let's tell the listeners all about it.
Yeah, so in most markets, the book is out on Tuesday, April 13th. The night before, I'm going to hijack Trevor Sumner's This Week in Retail event on Clubhouse. So we'll be talking about the book and having some special friends join us. And then the next day, on Tuesday, April 13th, also at 5 p.m. Eastern, I'll be doing a virtual book launch event on Zoom. We'll have a bunch of special guests. Sucharita Kodali, Seth Godin, and others will join us. You're nice enough to be hosting it. So we'll have those dates to refresh your memory, as well as the details on how to participate in the show notes and on social media. All right. And with that, let's bring on Brendan Witcher and talk about disruption and destruction in retail.
Brendan, welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate the time.
Well, fantastic to hear your voice, if not to see you in person. I was thinking, when's the last time I saw you? It was sitting in one of those unusual work cubes at the NRF show on the basement outside the media room, and I looked over, and there you were. You had commandeered one. I think you got there at 4:00 in the morning to commandeer yourself a workspace. But it is great to hear your voice, and again, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
No, it's great to be here. And yeah, it's an art form navigating the NRF show, right? Once you do it a few years, you start to learn the secrets and the tricks of being able to find some place to park yourself. So.
That's right. Navigating the endless aisles, so to speak.
That's right.
Brandon, tell us about yourself. Give us a background about you, what you do, how you came to be at Forrester, and what your beat is at Forrester.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been at Forrester about 7 years. I cover digital business strategy, and I lean in on that word strategy a lot because I'm not a tech analyst. I don't care what an API is. I don't even know what an API is, to be quite frank with you. I don't really look at technology. I more look at what's going on with consumers and how they're behaving and why they're behaving the way they're behaving. And then I look at what organizations can do to better serve those consumers based on what the consumers are expecting and what their needs are. And then as a third step, I look at technology and I look at the capabilities that today's new innovative tech can provide to ultimately enable those retailers and brands and other organizations to provide those experiences for consumers. So I kind of come at it from the reverse way of the way you'd work a maze, right? If you work from the center and the way out, it's a lot easier than working from the, the openings on the outside and trying to find your way in. So that's kind of my approach as an analyst. I just very quickly, I was head of strategy for Guitar Center before this job, which was an interesting job out there in California. And then before that, I was head of marketing for a company called Harry and David out in beautiful Medford, Oregon, now owned by 1-800-Flowers. And then I have a history outside of retail. Before that, I was in the restaurant business in Chicago, and so it's kind of my background.
Steve, I think you've got so many great ideas about so many different directions we could take the conversation.
Well, that's I think the hard thing with someone like Brendan. So maybe we just start off really, really big picture and then start to drill down. I mean, as you look at what's going on in retail today, what's on your short list of strategies that you think are really helping retailers right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a few of them that I would point out are very important. One is an ongoing one, and it's something that I've seen for years now, which is organizations and brands need to realize that, yes, they cannot be behind consumers' expectations. That's absolutely true. And that if I said that, you'd be like, yeah, it's not very analysty of you, right? That's pretty well-known fact. But the reality is that you also can't be too far ahead of the consumer, right? And that's why is that? It's because if you try to work on something that consumers don't really expect yet or they don't really want, it probably means you didn't work on something that they did expect or that they did want. I have yet to meet a retailer or brand that has unlimited time and unlimited resources to work on anything they want. And so they're usually sacrificing something that's probably at their core in order to chase some kind of shiny object that consumers just aren't going to want yet. I always joke, I always bet when I'm talking to people, I bet people at Starbucks that I won't find a single customer this year that will walk into a store, look around and go, oh, there's no virtual reality. I'm out of here. Right? Like it's not going to happen. Right. And so maybe you don't need that quite yet. Right. But there are plenty of customers who are going to go, wow, you sent me 136 emails this year and none of them were relevant to me. Right. Yeah. So that will happen. So that's the kind of things that I help with strategy. That's number one. Number two is the idea that organizations today, because of what's happened with the pandemic, because of what we've just gone through, they're starting to rethink retail like they never have before. And that's a good thing. If I can quote Michelle Gass here, I'd say that, she I'm going to paraphrase her, but, she basically said that the apple cart's been upset, right? Like we've tipped over the apple cart. Apples are everywhere anyway. So we might as well build retail the way it should be built. And that to me is an important point because retail is not designed to meet the needs of what consumers are expecting today. The consumers evolve much faster than the retail space. And then the third one that I would say is most important is understanding the non-technical problems that companies have in order to change. Again, something I'd often say from stage or when I'm in front of audiences is I say, the reality is you can buy all the technology you want. You can buy $2 million worth of tech, 20 million, 200 million. If you don't change culture in your organization, your organizational silos, you don't fix the right metrics in order to measure success, then I guarantee, and it was a guarantee, I say, that they'd be the same company next year that they are this year. It isn't just a tech problem. And so really transformation means all parts and pieces, technical and non-technical. So those are the three things I think heading into the rest of 2021 and into the next year that organizations need to be thinking about and understanding how their vision works in all three of those areas.
So on that last one in particular, one of the things that Michael and I have talked about a bunch of times on the podcast, and I touch on a little bit in my book, is, why does it take a crisis for retailers to innovate? And what is it about changing culture? Because I do think it largely comes back to culture and fear of failure and those sorts of things. Why is that fundamentally so hard? Because I do feel like, okay, yes, this has obviously been a very transformative, disruptive time, but it's not like retail has been without disruption for many, many years. So what's special about this time, and what would you say companies have to do to really attack that cultural issue?
Yeah, well, a couple of points I'm going to lean on there. A couple of your frames, Steve, I'm going to address. One is I wouldn't call this disruption as much as I'd call it destruction. Disruption is when someone comes along and does things better than you, and suddenly you have to chase that. My friend and colleague, James McQuivey, who wrote the book, Digital Disruption, he talks about this at length about how, what digital disruption really is more players coming into the market at a cheaper cost and being able to innovate faster. And that forces everyone to try to keep up quicker. Versus the old days when you had just a few companies that really could afford to innovate. And so innovation just didn't happen that quickly. What we've gone through here is more of a destruction where that we've really, and I don't mean to be dramatic about it. That's not what I mean. It just matches with the word, disruption very nicely. But the word destruction in this way is we've kind of destroyed the way people are shopping by making them and forcing them to shop in ways that they haven't before. You've got about 1 out of 5 consumers in the US buying groceries online for the first time in their lives. That is not something that's called disruption. That's called destruction, right? They're destroying their old ways of shopping and their behaviors and rethinking even who they do business with. There's plenty of individuals, and I'm sure that all three of us are them, who have looked at new retailers we've never really looked at in the past and said, well, maybe I can get that here, right? Or maybe I can get that there, where you would normally have gotten it from somebody local or a different retailer. And so that's what's really happened. And so the difference between disruption and the destruction that's happened is that disruption is something that people say, well, we're still doing okay, right? We're still hanging on, and that's a big investment. And a lot of it has to do with retailers don't want to be, I'm going to say this in a very controversial way, but retailers don't want to be leaders. Yeah. And I don't think they should be leaders. It's a very dangerous position to get really far ahead and do very innovative things just to find out that they don't work, right? You see all these companies that come and go, these startups that everyone gets all jazzed about, right? That take Brandless, for example, right? I really liked Brandless. I liked their ideas and I liked their concepts, but they were really out there, right? About the way they were approaching retail. And of course, now they're no longer in business. And so retailers can't really risk that. They want to be fast followers. That's the sweet spot for retailers, is to let other people test and learn and then chase them. The problem is that what most retailers determine as fast followers are actually laggards. Yeah. So, they end up saying we're going to be fast followers, but then they never actually do it, which turns them into laggards. And that's one of the problems that we have. Where the destruction phase, everything's broken anyway. Nobody's going into stores, so you might as well redesign your store, right? Like you've got this whole world where consumers have reset their expectations and retailers are looking at an opportunity to reset their own ways they're making investments in retail.
One thing I just want to ask you about real quickly, which I think is related to this, and maybe you've updated your thoughts, but I remember we were at a conference together, and in your presentation you said that when it comes to applying relevant experience, only the last, I don't know if you said few years count or 3 years count. I don't remember exactly how you said
it. Yeah,
three. And I think your point was largely that, so much has happened that you want to kind of unlearn the things that made you successful. Any update to that statement or clarification around it?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to address that, because I think it's important to note that what I was trying to say was, when I said that, again, you're taking that out of context of a long speech, right? But what I was pointing out at the time that I said that was that, in the past, we used to be able to win customers with assortment. When I was at Guitar Center before this, we carried, I think at the time we carried somewhere between 160 and 180,000 SKUs. We owned 66% of the music industry market. Right? Like, we were a huge company, but we leaned in on that assortment as a way of winning, right? Because we had done it since the 70s, right? That's how we had won business. And when I was there, I was trying to convince the executive team to realize that the truth of the matter is that we're no longer competing against one, Daddy's Music or, Sam Good or any of those companies. We were competing against the entire internet now, right? The assortment was the internet, which is why I wasn't saying that assortment was something that we didn't need to have. What I was saying was it's not the competitive advantage it used to be. In fact, part of that speech that I give is me saying your products don't matter anymore. Now, that's a lot of hyperbole in some ways, right? But what I'm trying to say is that when I ask consumers how many places can you buy a coffee maker or diapers, bananas, batteries, or whatever it is, they don't say 5. They don't say 10. They say hundreds, they say thousands. And I'm not making this up. This is actually the way that they respond. When I ask the question, I can almost guarantee it. When I'm on stage, when I ask the question, they think they can get these things anywhere. The question becomes, who will provide me the experience that I want in order for me to choose that company to get it from?
Yep.
Right. And that's what I meant by the last 3 years. Is what I'm saying is that today's consumers expect more than what they had before. And their use of mobile, their use of websites, they become more digitally savvy. They expect, channelless commerce. They expect more personalized experiences. They expect more on-time delivery, better in-stock positions. They expect the whole experience to just be simpler and easier, because that's who they're shopping with today. And if you're going to win them, you got to provide those experiences. And you couldn't get away with what you got away with 4 or 5 years ago, which was having a consumer come in store and see that the item's out of stock and go, well, they'll just buy another item. No, they'll just open their phone, go to Amazon and buy it there and ship it to their home, right?
Yep.
Like that's what I mean by what happened beyond 3 years doesn't matter anymore. What I'm saying is that that's not the important points. Those things just don't happen anymore. And you need to look at the way consumers are behaving today in order to serve them today.
Let me follow up on this. I call it this jump ball moment. In other words, consumer behavior, we've pulled a circuit breaker on consumer behavior in ways that we probably haven't done since the Second World War. And we're all trying to encapsulate that way in some ways that we can all understand it. Sometimes that leads to buzzwords like omnichannel or retail apocalypse or the great acceleration. Are you buying into some of these notions? Is it too early to understand the COVID era, or are you starting to think that some of these things matter, that there's some net new behaviors? Maybe it's work from home that's going to transform, as you said, culture. Maybe it's this acceleration that's going to stick. What are you thinking about when you like to, that's a myth, just get past that. That's just a flash. That's an adaptation of the COVID era versus this is a structural change and we need to really pay attention to it.
Yeah, I mean, the three words that you outlined there as buzzwords are very interesting because they each have their own characteristics that make them either worthy of listening to or not worthy of listening to. The very first one, omnichannel, that was happening long ago. I mean, I started as an analyst in 2014, and we were just starting to do cross-channel shopping, right? And it was accelerating long before the pandemic. Yeah. So this is not a pandemic thing. This is a thing that was happening. It accelerated during the pandemic, and it will probably continue to do it. And there's very good reasons. The length of this podcast doesn't allow for me to go into all the reasons that omnichannel meets the needs of consumers. Mm-hmm. But what it comes down to is it meets a lot of the needs for the online shopper and the offline shopper in one single transaction. And so this was a popular way of shopping even beforehand. So that buzzword in itself isn't much of a buzzword, it's a change in customer behavior. Right. The great retail apocalypse, which is kind of nonsense because when people would say the apocalypse, I'd say, okay, maybe there is, but the way that it was being defined was a mistake. People were saying that it was a store problem. It was never a store problem. It was brands that had become irrelevant were going out of business, yes. Right? And
preaching to the choir, my man.
That is where, yes, and that is where the media takes a story and ties two things together and says, well, I see companies with stores closing, so the apocalypse is those companies with stores are, stores are irrelevant. It's a false leap to make. Right? Because, there's plenty of companies with stores that were opening stores, Tractor Supply and Dick's Sporting Goods and other people and Best Buy. They're all opening stores, right? In many cases. So why is that? If it was truly a store problem, then that would be the problem. But it wasn't. If you look at the brands that were going under, you had the Sears and JC Penney's. These were not brands that people were jazzed about anymore, right? Like when your primary products are tools and you start out with a marketing message that says like the softer side of Sears or lighter side of Sears, you clearly don't understand your customers at that point, right? Like this is like a core retail mistake, or Ron Johnson coming into JC Penney trying to turn it into Apple, right? Like these were mistakes that were clearly made. Toys R Us didn't have a store problem; they had a debt problem, right? Everybody knows that, right? And they went out of business because they had too much debt. But that's not an easily digestible thing outside of the retail space. If you're not in the business, you don't understand that. And so what ends up happening is the media translates it in a way that people can easily digest and easily understand.
It does feel like the great acceleration, our friend Carl Boutet, amongst others, came up with that, is more accurate than the other, well, not the other two, but certainly the retail apocalypse, which was more of a media narrative, false narrative. But this acceleration seems to have happened. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, I know Carl, and I've heard him say that, and I've heard him talk about that. I don't disagree with it. I might put a little asterisk next to what he writes, though, because while I agree that we accelerated, we certainly didn't push on the gas and lay a brick down on top of it. So what's going to happen is we're going to decelerate, which is an odd thing to say. But the truth of the matter is that for 20 years, we've been talking about how consumers find a better way to shop and then they adopt that into their lives. And it's been absolutely true. And I'm a big believer in that, 100%. So is Forrester. But this isn't our choice. This is forced behavior. And so we're in a state where we really can't go into stores. I know I can't go into my local hardware store right now. They only have buy online, pick up in store. And there's a couple of things causing what Carl calls the acceleration that are attributing this. One is we're forced to shop online with some companies. So that's just the way that it is. Number two, and this is critically important, is that most companies out there, although it breaks most accounting rules, are counting things like buy online, pick up in store as an e-commerce sale.
Yes.
It is not an e-commerce sale. It is a store sale. Why is that? Because from accounting principles, you would normally attribute sales to the place where the inventory and the costs and the labor live, right? And so if you end up doing the danger, you may say, so what's the danger? The danger is that if you count it as e-commerce and everyone thinks everyone's going to e-commerce, there might be an indication of people saying, well, since everyone's going to e-commerce, we should close stores. Well, guess what happens when you close stores? You can't do that buy online, pick up in store. You can't do that curbside, right? And so it's a misstatement to say that e-commerce is accelerating. That's not true. It's gone forward by about 7 years. There's two contributing factors to that, but those contributing factors will go away after the pandemic, meaning the one will be more less restrictive on our in-store shopping. And the other one will be maybe omnichannel will start to get its due and be its own category of shopping rather than just attributing it to e-commerce and forgetting the fact that without the store, that e-commerce wouldn't have happened. Just in closing on that statement, I would say while we've pulled forward about 7 years, maybe 9 on grocery, we're going to pull back to probably about the great acceleration will be kind of a okay acceleration. We'll probably pull forward about 3 years, maybe 4. When this pans out, we'll probably be somewhere in the low 20s as a percent of retail will be e-commerce. Not at the 40% we're sitting at today. That is just not going to happen. It's gonna pull back. Grocery, same thing.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I guess I want to go back a little bit too, and I don't want to get like too into the semantics of this, but I do think the classification of e-commerce is worth talking about, not only because to your point that there is kind of the conclusion that with all this stuff moving online, I therefore don't need stores or I don't need as many stores, and I think that's clearly not right in a lot of cases. I also think it starts to affect how stores operate, right? Like if you have, I was saying to somebody this morning that if I go over to the Nordstrom near me, they've now got like 3,000, 4,000 square feet devoted to online pickup in store. You know, I'm not sure how many orders they're fulfilling from store stock, but you know, this idea that stores were mostly places to go see stuff and buy it and take it home. And we therefore want to maximize selling space is really, I think, starting to shift. Now, again, to your point, it remains to be seen how much of this persists at this hyper level. But aside from just this store closing false narrative, there's also this, well, stores are becoming much more hybrids in their roles, and maybe, you know, the deployment of different formats is going to change too, you know, with dark stores and Nordstrom local type formats. What's your take on all that?
I agree with that. I think, you know, you said it's funny that you use the word stores were mostly designed for people to walk in and buy things. Actually, they were entirely designed for people to walk in and buy things. Let's be super clear. When stores were created, here's what they were designed to do. You walk into a store, you pull something off a shelf, you go through point of sale, and you leave the store. That is literally the only thing a store was designed to do. And so in today's era, in other words, when there's any other form of shopping, the store is not designed to support it because it's still the same, right? Like that is literally the only way the store is truly optimized is for that style of shopping. Every other way, it's less than optimized for. So that could be curbside, that could be pickup, that could be, you know, things like dark stores, as you talked about, that could be pickup only locations. And not only that, things like ship from store or endless aisle where I'm in the store and I buy something that's available online, or associates having, you know, tools to be able to talk to me about things that are available in different channels or at different stores, right? There's so much to the new path to purchase. And stores, quite frankly, were not designed for it. And so, of course, you need to redesign it. Of course, you need to rethink it. And I think you're right that it's a hybrid model, but it's not really the hybrid. It's more of the new retail environment needs to be, okay, this is, since so many people are doing buy online and return to store, our returns area can't be the service area because now we're getting 10 times the number of products back in our store. Yep. Right? Like that just doesn't suit that anymore. And when 40% of our orders online are now buy online, pick up in store, we can't have the service desk be the buy online, pick up in store area, right? Mm-hmm. There's nothing more frustrating than me buying like a shutter fastener for 87 cents, going to pick it up in store, and I'm standing behind some guy who wants to return 200 pounds of concrete and Home Depot on there for 30 minutes, right? Like,
you sound like you're speaking. You sound like you're speaking
a random example.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things.
But here's the funny thing: I'm looking like a schmuck standing there, and I'm watching everybody else walk through point of sale, going, "What's wrong with me? I'm an idiot. What am I doing?
Try that self-checkout thing.
Why did I do this?"
One of the things that stores were designed for is to be clear and convenient access to people. If you were an executive and you were saying, "Listen, I think this is a strategic advantage because versus a pure play because I offer the ability for same day and convenience," and particularly in the return space, I think returns is very powerful. Like there seems to be a competing philosophy amongst retailers. I wonder what side you're on. One is stores, BOPIS and curbside are a very expensive way to do retail. The other is it's a wonderful way to be strategically sound and inexpensive way to do online fulfillment. Or is it both?
Well, I think it's a multi-part value proposition that you need to use stores for. So the three big ones, you've mentioned two, and I'm going to mention a third. The ability to buy online, pick up in store. It is, I get no shortage of inquiries from the retail and brand space. And there is no shortage of them that ask me, just as much as people wanted to know how to beat Guitar Center back in the day. People now ask me, well, how do we beat Amazon? I'm like, well, use your stores. They're like, yeah. But how do we really beat Amazon? I'm like, okay, listen, you have the thing to beat them with. They can't do buy online, pick up in store. They can't do that sort of stuff, right? And people always wonder, like, well, why is Amazon trying to get faster and faster delivery? Because it's one of the reasons we shop in stores is because we can get it today. Right. And Amazon knows that. And that's why they're trying to get faster and faster and faster. They still can't do the touch and feel of product before I buy it. But with things like wardrobe, they're trying to make things like that happen. But I think that the second one is the other one is buy online, return to store, right? Consumers, all you have to do is look at why people don't choose to shop online. It's because they feel like the returns process would be a pain. So again, that store creates an advantage there. But the third one, and any retailer out there can go look at their numbers and see that this is true. Your stores are a giant billboard for your company in the region, right? I got a lot of slack a couple of years ago in the Wall Street Journal. I said something about a certain CEO who was quite respected, but I said this person needed to get out of the business because the person had mentioned, CEO had said, we're going to close stores so we can focus on e-commerce. And I said, this is a person that clearly doesn't understand how the business works anymore. I said, your e-commerce sales are up because you have stores in those locations. And I made the quip. I said, listen, I go, why would you close stores where you can create a competitive advantage to go online where you have no competitive advantage? This is what people forget about e-commerce. E-commerce is a flattening of everyone has a homepage. Everyone has product assortment. Everyone has a checkout page and everyone ships the product. Tell me how you get a competitive advantage online. It doesn't. It is like you're going to a place that literally is harder to compete in than the ability to do it in a physical location where you can create those unique experiences. And so I just don't think people understand that those elements, when you go to move to e-commerce, you're making a mistake in not understanding that each consumer has their own situation in which they want to buy things. When I wake up in the morning, I don't, if I wake up in the morning and need something that day, my first thought isn't, I better go to the internet. No. My first thought is, where can I get it locally, right? But that's situational. There are some things that I need to get that I don't need right now. And I say, I'll just get it online. No big deal. But none of us are all e-commerce buyers. I haven't met a human being yet. Someone will probably email me later and say, I'm that person. But I haven't met a human being yet that hasn't been in a store in the past year, whether it be grocery, a 7-Eleven, a Starbucks, a physical, whatever. We go into physical locations when it suits us. And so if you're truly a customer-obsessed, customer-centric company, you're not saying we're going to limit the way people can shop with us. You say it out loud and it's almost stupid, sounding, right, doesn't it?
Yeah, right.
Right? Like, hey, you know what? Here's these opportunities to sell. We're going to close those. And we're just going to make opportunities over here. And we're going to hope, a great business plan, we're going to hope people come to our website in a world where everybody basically, Jack's Shirts looks just as good as Macy's as an e-commerce website, Great idea. And by the way, Amazon's sitting there waiting for you too.
Yeah.
So I don't see the point in that. I think it's a bad strategy.
Well, it's interesting because I did get some pushback. I said, you show me a brand that's closing a lot of stores, and you show me a brand that doesn't have a too many stores problem. They have a brand relevance problem, which I think is, another way of saying what you said. And closing stores does not do anything to improve a retailer's competitive position. It may get them out of a liability, right? But why, I go back, and I don't know if you have any particular insight on this, but I do feel like, some of these points, whether they've been made by, Forrester or Deloitte or, all sorts of industry analysts or various pundits and whatnot, and there's certainly ample, going way back to my days at Neiman Marcus, we had plenty of data on what was going on with the interaction between stores and digital. And this is certainly before we got to the levels that we're at today. So what is it that causes retailers to fundamentally miss what's going on? I used to chalk it up to the siloed organizations, that there was really the e-commerce division and the store division, and that was the big barrier. But I'm not so sure that that's so true anymore. What's your perspective on how people miss this and what they need to do to get out of their own way, I guess?
Yeah. Well, first, I would not discount the power of groupthink, right? When you read in CNBC that stores are closing, more stores are closing than opening, and the truth of the matter is more stores are opening than closing, that's a problem. And you start to hear that in the media, and you start to think, oh yeah, everybody's moving online, I better too, right? Remember, retailers have a tendency to want to do what everyone else is doing. And if they think everyone else is doing that, then that's what they should do, right? That kind of an idea. The number two thing is, quite frankly, while organizations, I'm going to lean on that buzzword for a minute, while organizations want to create these seamless, omni-channel, whatever you want to call it, unified commerce experiences for consumers, they very much still operate as multi-channel retailers within the organization. For example, I know plenty of CFOs who still give credit for online sales to the online channel and credit for in-store sales to just the store sale. And they budget their spend to each group based on those sales.
Yep.
Rather than understanding the influence that those channels have on each other's sales, right? Finance people tend to be very cut and dry, very binary, right? And so this is your sale, we're going to give you this budget, right? And so in some ways, internally, the organizations have those problems. 53% of organizations say culture is limiting their ability to digitally transform properly. In fact, 83% say organizational silos create those problems. So there is a huge gap that's going on internally at lots of organizations in not understanding how that's happening. And the other thing is that, and I don't mean to disparage anybody when I say this, but the reality is, if you want to get short-term gains, close your stores. Sure. That's a good way of cutting costs. Mm-hmm. It's a great way of cutting costs. It's going to make your P&L look great. And if you're an executive that only plans on being there for the next year or two, you're going to look like a hero, right? Problem is, the long-term effect of that on your brand is to the negative. And if you're someone who's going to be there for the next 10 or 15 years, that's going to be a different decision you probably make, because you're thinking about the long-term effect of the brand. But let me just say point blank, if you close your doors, you might as well just, close it all. Like if you close those stores, let me say it a different way. If you close your stores, you might as well close your doors. There you go. That's tweetable, right? If you close your stores, you might as well close your doors.
I think we got a meme now. You're a meme.
Maybe we got an episode title.
I'm a meme machine. I'm a meme machine, right? Like that's the thing. Like it's so true. And I've never seen anyone close their stores to get to growth, ever. I've never seen that case study.
Well, I make that statement in my book, and you've got more data than I do, so now I feel like I've said the right thing. So thanks for validating my data light opinions. But I know we're coming up on time. I don't know whether there's anything you really felt like we didn't get to that you really wanted to talk about, or Michael, whether you had any closing questions. I'm just mindful of our time.
Yeah, my last question, I guess, would be to bring it home, and Brendan, we got to get you back on the show, because I think we could have another couple of episodes like this. As a retail industry, we've gone through what you described as a destruction, the COVID era. What should the retail industry just leave behind? Like fresh start, out of the blocks. It's a unique opportunity in our lives to start something fresh. What should that be? Yeah,
I think what they need to do, what organizations need to do, to be quite honest, and this is like one of those Dr. Phil sort of moments for them, I think, where they really need to like examine themselves and understand, where are you being truly company obsessed, where you believe you're being customer obsessed. And I think there's too many companies out there that think, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do this for the customer so they can buy more things from us. Like, that is a company obsessed statement. That is not a customer obsessed statement, right? A customer obsessed company focuses more on, we want the customer to have the best experience possible because we believe in the long-term impact of that experience. When I owned, I used to own the Elbow Room in Chicago, the Elbow Room nightclub. And when I bought it, there were 2,600 liquor licenses in Chicago. And I asked the staff that I inherited, I said, what do we sell? And of course they said alcohol, right? Like that's the first thing they said. Some of them said live music because we were a live music club. And I said, actually, you can go get a vodka cranberry at 2,600 other locations with the exact same ingredients anywhere in the city. If that's what we sell, we're going to go out of business, right? What we sell is the Elbow Room experience. It's the Elbow Room experience. It has to be that experience. It has to be unique for us. And we have to deliver whatever people come in and show us that they want from us. What is it they're expecting? What is it they need from us that we can provide for them beyond the drink, right? And retailers need to go beyond the product. They need to stop saying, we want to this because it makes people buy more from us. That's a mistake because normally you just measure things in tiny windows, like over the weekend or this year versus last year, right? You need to look at the long-term effect of how your customers are leaving you and you don't even know it. Mm-hmm. And they're leaving you because you're not customer obsessed, you're company obsessed. And as my friend Mary Ransom, who was over at Bloomingdale's at the time we talked about this, said, what happens is you end up creating these short-term wins by doing what you want, and then you create long-term losses by creating a burn of your customer file. Yeah. Your customer file starts getting unhealthier and unhealthier, and it gets harder and harder to get those conversions. And that's what we need to leave behind. We need to leave behind this idea that it's all about this weekend versus last weekend, or this Tuesday versus last year's Tuesday. We need to start looking at, do customers show us that they want us in their lives, that we're at their top of their consideration set when they're ready to buy? And when we can get to that, it's those companies that can serve consumers at that level that are gonna win going forward. I guarantee it.
Well, that's a great place to leave off. I think there's been so many great points in here, and hopefully people will take heed and figure some of this stuff out. Well, thanks so much, Brendan, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And we'll try to get you back on and dig into many other things we started. And we'll put various links in the show notes so people can see some of the other great things that you and Forrester are up to. But thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure.
Well, Steve, it's great to hear from Brendan. And, it's interesting how, can COVID be that point of clarity around change? Brendan calls it destruction, which I thought was interesting, not disruption. I mean, as again, you and I have talked about the massive changes in consumer behaviors. You have employees working from home, retailers seeing the productivity benefits. Is there risk in all this that we just regress back to the mean? Or as you say, we regress back to the boring mill for too many retailers?
I think there is risk. I mean, if you look at the history of retail, and Brendan certainly got into some of this, there are a lot of these shifts that are shifts in consumer behavior or technology disruption or destruction that have been pretty obvious for a long time, and yet many retailers were slow to respond to them. So as we talked about at the top of the episode, why does it take a crisis for retailers to innovate? And I think, when you get up against the wall and perhaps you're facing imminent doom, it's a lot easier to change, right? It's not so easy to change when either you're not understanding how profound some of the changes are, or you just look at risk in a different way. So I definitely think as we get back to some semblance of normalcy, there is a real risk that retailers don't realize how much more has to be done to deal with this hybrid world, to deal with the blending of digital and physical channels, and just some of the persistent trends that will stick with us post-COVID.
Well, in some ways, the old saying, volume solves some sins in retail. I mean, for anyone who is reluctant around whether it's curbside or BOPUS or Boris or even e-commerce and the scale and scope, the consumer adoption has no doubt advanced many years. So perhaps that also advances their thinking and provides that impetus that is not crisis related, but just, this big step forward in terms of consumer behavior that is like, okay, now it's immutable. It's not going back. And now the volumes are there that make it make more sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I also think the thing to pay attention to is a lot of what retailers have done and are doing or are likely to do is going to get them to a place of parity, of dealing with what have become the new table stakes, right? So I think the question is, if you're still fundamentally irrelevant and you're fundamentally unremarkable, you still have a lot of work to do, right? So it's just not a matter of doing curbside pickup or appointment shopping or live streaming or what have you, right? It's much more making sure that you're really doing those things to stay, to be remarkable and stay remarkable as the industry evolves.
All right, we're back with Remarkable or Forgettable. Let's talk about Chewy. Let's talk about pandemic puppies. Let's talk about big results.
Well, Chewy's blockbuster sales, blockbuster earnings, or I should say at least profitability that they have not seen so far. And I think this is another example of some brands that have benefited enormously from some of the shifts we've seen. But I would say this is pretty remarkable. Chewy's has built a huge business in a fairly short amount of time. They've certainly been helped by some of the COVID forces. But I think, as we've talked about a few times, one of the things that's great about Chewy's as an online business is they're mostly in a convenience and selection sort of business, which the internet is good at, right? You don't really need to go to the store to get a big, container of dog food or some of the other stuff that's at the heart of their business. So, it remains to be seen if they'll be able to keep up this pace as we get back to a little bit more comfort in going to stores. But overall, it's pretty remarkable.
Well, and it's also the case that it's like an annuity. You've got all these new pets, net new pets, thanks to the COVID era. And now it's like an annuity. They're going to be around for years. So at least the demand, so to speak, will be out there. We're not talking about the tail wagging the dog. I could refuse. There we go. All right.
He's here all week, ladies and gentlemen.
Enjoy your chicken dinner. All right. Bed Bath & Beyond digital and private label dreams. What do you think about that?
Well, this is an ongoing story with Mark Triton, who's the relatively new CEO, came from Target. And I don't know, I'm a little mixed on all this. I think Bed Bath & Beyond is one of these brands that certainly is well known, has a good size, well-established customer base, good retail footprint, et cetera. They've now been working at a lot of things that I think were pretty known problems or shortcomings at Bed Bath & Beyond. So he's bringing in some really top e-commerce digital talent, and they are definitely running the Target playbook in terms of building out private brands. I mean, it was pretty shocking to me to learn, I guess I really hadn't focused on it, how poorly developed they were in the private brand business. And certainly they were, their stores were kind of a mess. So I think the jury is still out. I mean, I think these are really sensible things to do. They're longstanding problems. Mark seems to have, he's got a great track record. He's putting together a great team. So I think it's more one to watch as opposed to, remarkable or forgettable.
Well, I guess to your point, does it just get them to parity, in which case they'll still be in trouble, or does it get them ahead? Speaking of getting ahead, Kroger had some great results. They're talking about doubling digital sales, and they're talking about a fading tailwind, which is kind of like, is that foreshadowing of things to come?
Well, managing expectations. I mean, the grocery business, I think, is going to be definitely remarkable from the standpoint of we're going to be talking about it a lot because there's just so much going on, right? There's been this massive shift to e-commerce. But I think as people go back to restaurants, right, there's going to be this tailwind that I think they were alluding to. We've got Amazon upping their game. So I think, a lot of conversation here. I think we're going to see a number of retailers be telling Wall Street, like, calm down. We're not going to run the really tough comps coming up, and it's just going to be hard to sustain those. That doesn't mean, though, that the business is in trouble. It's just, kind of an expectation comparing to really unusual times.
And talking about running the business, Nike is run itself out of some pretty big retailers, right? They dropped 7 retailers, including Macy's. What do you think of all that?
Well, first of all, full disclosure, Nike's been a client of mine in the past. I talk about them a lot in the book, about particularly their consumer direct offense, which is the strategy they've been running at for several years now and is behind their decision to drop a lot of wholesale partners. I think a lot of brands, not just Nike, we talked about Adidas, I think last week, that are realizing that there's a lot of advantages to try to go as direct to consumers as they can, ability to control the brand experience, ability to capture more margin, more customer data, end consumer data. So I think this is just another step. So I think it's pretty remarkable in terms of the evolution of the business and some of the broader changes we're seeing with manufacturer brands in the wholesale relationship. The only thing that I would mention is I think there's some concern that they could overshoot the runway by trying to go too far.
A step
into
too far,
direct to consumer. Yeah. And, I think that's worth watching. The retailers that they pulled out of, for the most part, are not retailers that are growing, and they're not retailers where they really get the showcase kind of position they want. So I think they'll still have, between obviously a strong and rapidly growing e-commerce business and their own points of distribution and some remaining major wholesale relationships, they'll still have a good presence.
Let's talk about green shoots at JC Penney. New leadership talks about this green shoots. That's optimistic, but I guess you got to say something, right?
Yeah, it's a difficult position. I think maybe they might be picking mushrooms more than green shoots. I think this is completely forgettable, or will be remarkable, and that it will come back to haunt them. Penny's. First of all, I think every apparel player on the planet is probably going to have increases in the second half of the year. It's not really a matter of...
It's a comp store. It's the opposite of grocery, right? It's the comp store in the other direction, right?
Well, and years ago, I remember somebody I worked with saying to me, well, the best way to run a comp increase is to run a horrible decrease the year before, right? So now that obviously wasn't intentional on the part of Penny's, but they're pretty easy comparisons. So I think, not only do we need to really baseline this more to 2019, but I also think, I know Penny's has leaked so much market share over the last 10 years or so that they are way underwater. So not to mix the metaphor, but, you got to pull out of a dive, right, before you can ascend. But I think this is much ado about nothing.
All right. Well, that's this episode of Remarkable or Forgettable. We'll be back next week. Another great episode, Steve. Take us home.
Well, if you liked what you heard, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you can catch up with all our great interviews and insights, and new episodes will show up every week. And please take a minute to drop us that elusive 5-star rating. I'm Steve Dennis. For my latest insights, follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and be sure to order your copy of the second edition of Remarkable Retail from just about anywhere books are sold.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, producer and host of the Voice of Retail podcast. You can learn more about me on www.emmyleblanc.co. Steve, have a great week.